Greetings, brethren. Today we'll be looking at historical records or testimonies for extra biblical evidence for Jesus. We're looking at evidence outside the Bible because people nowadays, especially the younger generation, are oriented towards science and logic. This is just how the younger generation is wired. They are taught to block out everything that isn't taught to them in school. They are taught what to think, but not how to think for themselves. Critical, think, critical thinking skills are lacking. If it doesn't happen in the science lab or in nature, it's just not real. So we must sometimes change our approach of preaching the gospel to reach other people. So I'm not saying that preaching the gospel from the Bible of itself still doesn't work. It still does work. I mean, but it doesn't work for everyone because this world has become more secular. How can you convince someone that the Bible is true by using the Bible when they reject the Bible, when they see it just as some fairy tale? They reject um, every premise of the Bible in its entirety. So sometimes you have to switch up your approach. So we'll go through here. Um, Look at historians back in the early days of Christianity of the church, the early century of the church, to see um, the records of testifying about Christians and Jesus Christ. Um, First, we're looking at Flavius Josephus, or just people know him as Josephus for short. He lived from 37 AD to 100 AD. He was Jewish in ethnicity, but he was a Roman Jewish historian. Now, this comes from his work Antiquities of the Jews, Book 18, Chapter 5, and Paragraph 2. Now, this is about the John the Baptist. Now, it reads here. Now, some of the Jews thought that the destruction of the Herod's army came from God, and that very justly, as a punishment of what he did against John, that he was called the Baptist. For Herod slew him, who was a good man. Herod, who feared the great influence John had over the people, might put into his power and inclination to raise a rebellion. Accordingly, he was sent a prisoner out of Herod's suspicious temper and to Macherus, the castle I before mentioned, and was put there to death. Now we go to another, the same writing of Josephus, Antiquities of Jews, but this is where he attests to, talks about Jesus and his crucifixion. So this comes from Antiquities of the Jews, Book 18, Chapter 3, Paragraph 3. About this time there lived Jesus, a wise man, if indeed one ought to call him a man, for he was one who would perform surprising deeds, that it was a teacher of such people accept the truth gladly. He won over many Jews and many of the Greeks. He was the Christ, and was upon the accusation of the principal men among us. Pilate had condemned him to a cross. Those who had first come to love him did not cease. He appeared to them, spending a third day restored to life. For the prophets of God had foretold these things, and 1,000 other marvels about him. And the tribe of the Christians, so called after him, has still to this day not disappeared. Now, this is Josephus writing about James, the brother of Jesus. Um, in the same work, Antiquity of the Jews, Book 20, Chapter 9, and Paragraph 1. Festus was now dead, and Albinus was upon the road. So he assembled the Sanhedrim of judges, brought before them the brother of Jesus, who was called Christ, whose name was James. So they're bringing, he writes that they're bringing the brother of Jesus, which was name was Jesus, whose name was James, and some others for some of his companions. They brought to judge him, James and some of his companions. And when he was formed an accusation against the breakers of the law, he delivered them to be stoned. But as for those who seemed the most equitable of the citizens, such as were the most uneasy and breached of the laws, they disliked what was done. They also sent the king. They were also sent to the king, King Agrippa. Another historian called Cornelius Tacitus, though from 56 AD to 120 AD. He was a Roman and Roman historian. He writes here, but all human efforts, all the lavish gifts of the emperor, and the propitiations of the gods do not banish the sinister belief that the conflagration was the result of an order. Consequently, to get rid of the report, they were fastened the guilt and inflict the most exquisite tortures on a class hated for their abominations called Christians by the populace. And this continues. Christos, from whom the name had its origin, suffered the extreme penalty during the reign of Tiberius at the hands of one of the procurators, Pontius Pilate. In a most mischievous superstition, this checked for the moment again broke out not only in Judea, the first source of the evil, but even in Rome, where all things hideous and shameful from every part of the world find their center and become popular. Accordingly, an arrest was first of all who pleaded guilty. Then, upon their information, an immense multitude was convicted, not so much of the crime of firing the city as hatred against mankind. It's come from the Annals. The Annals of Tacitus, Book 15, Chapter 44. Also, we have the Talmud, written between 280 to 500 AD, and this is the Jews who kept the records of such things, and they paint Jesus in negative light. They were enemies of Jesus. So we're not going to only focus on the ones who speak kindly of him, but also enemies. On the eve of the Passover, Yeshua was hanged. For 40 days before the execution took place, a herald went forth and cried, "He is going forth to be stoned because he practiced sorcery and enticed Israel to apostasy. Anyone who can say anything in his favor, let him come forward and plead on his behalf." But since nothing was brought forward in his favor, he was hanged on the eve of the Passover. So let's stop there for a little bit. Jesus Christ was hanged on a cross, not just like hanged with a rope, but he was hanged on the tree or on the cross. So don't get confused here. I'll report it. Do you suppose that that one of whom a defense could be made, was he not a Messeth or a Ticer, concerning whom Scripture says, "Neither thou shalt spare, neither thou shalt conceal him"? With Yeshua, however, it was different, for he was connected with royalty. Also, we go to another historian called Pliny the Younger, lived from 61 AD to 113 AD, and he comes from Italy. He writes a letter to the Emperor Trajan. Meanwhile, in the case of those who were denounced to me as Christians, I have observed the following uh, per- procedure. I interrogated these as to whether they were Christians. Who confessed, I interrogated a second time, and a third time, threatening them with punishment. For those who persisted, I ordered executed. For I have no doubt that whatsoever the nature of their creed, stubbornness, and inflexible abscesses surely deserved to be punished. There were others possessed of the same folly, but because they were Roman citizens, I signed an order for them to be transferred to Rome. Soon accusations spread, as usually happens because of the proceedings going on, and several incidents occurred. An anonymous document was published containing the names of many persons. Those who denied that they were or had been Christians when they invoked the gods and words dedicated by me, offered prayer with incense and wine to your image, which I had ordered to be brought for this purpose, together with statues of the gods, more of a cursed Christ, none of which who were really Christians, it is said, can be forced to do. These I thought should be discharged. Um, Others named by the informer declared that they were Christians, but they denied it, asserting that they had been, but ceased to be some 3 years before. However many years, some as much as 25 years, they all worshipped your image and statues and cursed Christ. They asserted, however, that the sum and substance of their fault and error had been that they were accustomed to meet on a fixed day before dawn and sing responsively a hymn to Christ as to a God, and to bind themselves by oath, not to some crime, but not to commit fraud, theft, or adultery, not to falsify their trust, nor to refuse to return a trust when called upon to do so. When this was over, it was their custom to depart and assemble again to partake of food, but ordinary innocent food. Even this they affirmed that they had ceased to do after my edict, which in accordance with your instructions I have forbidden political association. Accordingly, I judged it all the more necessary to find out what the truth was by torturing two female slaves who were called deaconesses. But I discovered nothing else but depraved excessive superstition. I therefore postponed the investigation and hastened to consult you, for the matter seemed to be to warrant consulting you, especially because the number I invoked for many of the persons of very age, rank, also of both sexes, were and will be in danger. For the contagion of this superstition was spread not only to the cities but to the villages and farms. But it seemed possible to check and cure it. It is certainly quite clear that the temples which had been most deserted had begun to be frequented, and established religious rites among the neglected, but being resumed, and from everywhere sacrificial animals coming, for which until now very few purchasers would be found. Hence, it's uh, easy to imagine what a multitude of people can be reformed if opportunity for repentance is afforded. So this is applying the younger letters, um, chapter 10, 96 to 97. Also, we have Lucian of Samosata, um, lived from 115 AD to 180 AD. It was when that he learned the wondrous lore of the Christians by associating with their priests and scribes of Palestine. How else could it be? In a trace he made them all look like children, for he was a prophet, cult leader, head of the synagogue, and all by himself. He interpreted and explained some of the books and even composed many of the reverend as a god, made use of him as a lawgiver, and set him down as a procurator. Next, after that other, Shore, whom they still worship, and the man was crucified in Palestine because he introduced this new cult into the world. So there's some that there was enemies of Christ that spoke negatively and defamed him, but nevertheless they testified. So, um, continuing on, the poor wretches have convinced themselves first and foremost that they were going to be immortal and live for all time, in consequence of which they despise death and even willingly give themselves to custody. Most of them, furthermore, their first lawgiver persuaded them that they all are all brothers of one another after they transgress once, for all by denying the great gods and worshiping that crucified sophist. So he's calling him philosopher, either a philosopher or a liar. So probably a philosopher. So by worshiping that crucified sophist himself and living under his laws, therefore by they despised all these indiscriminately and considered them common property, receiving such doctrines traditionally without a definite evidence. So if any charlatan and trickster able to profit by occasion comes among them, he has quickly acquired sudden wealth by imposing upon civil folk. This is writing of Lucian Samosata, Samosata about the death of Peregrinus, paragraphs 11 to 13. So you see that the historians attest to Jesus Christ and Christians and the customs of what Christians were doing in the early years. So you see, not just people who spoke kindly, thought kindly of him, attest to him, but even his enemies attested to him, and those who try to defame him, and stuff like that. So you see, it's not just that our book that we go by our book. I mean, history attests to that Jesus Christ actually lived and Christians did what they did in the early years. So you see that there is evidence, there's testimony that these things really happened, and Jesus Christ was real, and as Christians did such customs did what they did. Um, so um, so I hope this sheds some light on give you some background information and some extra evidence of for those that do not see are not convinced by the Bible alone. So we'll see you next time. Thank you and take care.